For more on this story, we're joined by Annelle Sheline. She's a non-resident fellow at the Arab Centre, Washington, D.C., and a research fellow for the Middle East at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft. Welcome, Annelle. Thanks so much for joining us. How concerning, firstly, is this development that the leader of Yemen's southern separatist, Aidarus al-Zubaidi, failed to board his flight to Riyadh for those crisis talks?
It's hard to say so far. I would say at this point, it does appear that the Saudi-backed forces have really consolidated control over much of the former South Yemen that is controlled by the internationally recognized government. But as you said, the fact that he refused to join this meeting in Riyadh and is at large does portend the possibility of a rebellion and possibly continued violence. I would say, however, that I don't believe he's likely to get too much more support from the UAE. It does seem that the UAE is trying to perhaps avoid a direct confrontation with Saudi Arabia over Yemen.
How much does this fragmentation, I guess, within the anti-Houthi camp undermine efforts for peace in Yemen?
Clearly, as we're seeing, the very fractious nature of the anti-Houthi coalition, which has long perpetuated sort of the conflict in Yemen, is now coming to the fore and does reflect this sort of Saudi-Emirati split. Many would argue that because you have this group of actors in the Presidential Leadership Council that have such disparate goals, specifically the goal of southern secession versus preserving Yemeni unity, that this was never a particularly effective coalition against the Houthis that hold control in Sana'a. Moving forward, it's not yet clear, are we headed to a period of a complete breakdown and even more violence, which would only benefit the Houthis in Sana'a, perhaps to the concern of the United States, for example, or will we see the UAE signaling to these proxy forces that it is not interested in sort of doubling down on conflict with Saudi Arabia, and so they would have to go it alone?
And what are the regional implications of this deepening, it seems, rift between Saudi Arabia and the UAE?
Well, we're seeing this also playing out in Sudan, where the UAE is supporting the Rapid Defense Forces, while the Saudis are supporting the Sudanese armed forces, both of which have committed horrific atrocities. But the RSF in particular has been accused of really horrific war crimes, perhaps even genocide in Sudan. We've also seen this play out in Libya, and then now with Israel recognizing Somaliland and the possibility that the UAE might move to do that as well, we're seeing this sort of Israeli, Emirati, and then there are various sort of proxy groups that seem to be trying to establish a new vision for the Middle East, whereas you have countries like Saudi Arabia, along with Egypt, along with perhaps Turkey, that are interested in preserving stability, are very concerned about the rise or the empowerment of these non-state actors, which at this point, the UAE and arguably Israel, with what Israel's doing with the Druze community, for example, in Syria, they appear to be more comfortable with this sort of fragmentation.
Annelle Sheline, non-resident fellow at the Arab Centre, Washington, D.C. Thanks so much for your time and analysis.
Thank you.